Hi everyone, Sarah from Turning Point here, and this is the time that I answer all of your questions. I have combined all the questions from all 5 sessions into one video for you. And just first off, I want to apologize because my computer has like the worst camera ever. So this looks like it's filmed in 1 pixel, and I apologize. But really, it's the content that I want to make sure that I'm covering because I said I was going to answer every question, and I am because I am a woman of my word. So I appreciate those who took the time in the surveys to ask questions. There's a lot of good questions in here. Some things that I see a lot, and some questions that I've never been asked for. So I'm excited to get into it. And as always, I like to just give kind of a warning for those who might need it, is that some of the questions are about sexual assault and consent. So that's just a trigger warning for you. If you need it, I want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves at all times. And just to clarify, if when I answer these questions, you still have more questions, you can always reach out to me. Your teachers do have my contact information, and I am here. I am your resource. So if I, for some reason, didn't get to your question, or my answer didn't make sense, or it made you think of something else, reach out to me. I want to make sure that I'm giving you the information that you need because I am here for you. And I also want to say, I was going through all the responses from all of the sessions, and you guys did a really great job with all the activities, all the worksheets. I really appreciate that you all liked the resources I gave you. I spent a lot of time going through the stuff that I use in my job, resources that I use, and it's nice to hear that you all liked them too. Okay, so let's just crack into it. Let's start answering these questions. So first question, this was about a question someone asked. Their partner didn't want to hear about their experiences with mental health. So someone was experiencing feelings of depression and was trying to disclose that to their partner and have a conversation about it. Their partner shut that conversation down, didn't want to talk about it, ended up ghosting that person as punishment, and then ended up breaking up with that person. And the person who asked me the question asked, is this my fault? And the answer is no. You should be able to feel vulnerable and safe with your partner, especially when you talk about the tough stuff like anxiety and depression and mental health in general. So it sounds like to me that you were trying to make that connection. Your partner shut it down for whatever reason. That's not fair to you. It's not okay. And it sounds like they're not mature, both just like emotionally mature to have those kind of conversations, and it's not your fault. And I think what also stuck out to me was like this punishment. That's really unfair and not cool, and that's a huge red flag that this person is trying to create those controls, to have that power over someone, saying that they're going to punish their partner. That's wild to me, and that's not fair, and that's not okay. So yeah, it's definitely not your fault that you were in a situation where your partner was not emotionally mature enough to hear you out and make you feel safe and allow you to feel vulnerable. This next question is a question that I get a lot, and it's a great question. How do you deal with jealousy and trust? That's $1 million question, right? When it comes to jealousy is a normal human emotion. You're gonna feel jealous sometimes, especially when you're in a dating relationship, and that's completely normal. What's not normal is if your jealousy is controlling or limiting. That control and that limit, right? Because we defined abuse as power and control. Abuse is always about power and control over someone else. There's no other excuse for abuse. So when we feel jealous and we decide to make the choice to be controlling or limiting by using a different form of an unhealthy behavior like physical abuse, mental, emotional, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, then we are being a bad partner. So when it comes to feeling like you're jealous and you don't know how to get over it, the best method is to talk to your partner about it. Now, I'm not saying that you tell your partner what they can and can't do because of your own feelings, because of your inability to in a healthy way recognize your jealousy. It's saying like, hey, I feel uncomfortable about this, and I want to make sure we're on the same page about this, and making sure they feel heard and that they still have a voice. And when it comes to trusting your partner, you shouldn't be dating someone you can't trust, period. If you have trust issues, and some people do for a variety of reasons, and that's absolutely valid. If you can't be in a healthy relationship because of trust issues, then you shouldn't be in a relationship. It sounds like there's some inner work you need to do before you make that commitment to someone, or someone wants to be in a relationship with you, because trust is that foundation piece. And if you're constantly questioning your relationship, if you constantly feel like you can't trust your partner, then it sounds like that relationship isn't healthy, right? And I think what's the biggest part about jealousy and trust is that there needs to be communication happening in that relationship. And remember, when it comes to problems in your relationship, whatever it is, it's not you versus your partner. It's you and your partner versus whatever that problem is, and getting to a resolution together, making compromises, understanding everybody's needs, recognizing that you both have rights in the relationship, that it's not 50-50, it's 100-100 when it comes to the work that's put into a healthy relationship. And this next question kind of ties into that, and it is, what causes an unhealthy relationship? Like what is that called? And I use the term the breaks. So let's say people are dating, and then one or more of the breaks happens. A break in communication, a break in trust, a break in respect, a break in the boundaries. That foundation gets cracks in it. It starts to crumble. It starts to break. So when those things happen, that's when that relationship starts to become unhealthy. And when we talk about unhealthy relationships, we start to see that the person, the perpetrator, is trying to test the limits of that power and control. What can they say, do, how can they act, that they can see how far they can go with that unhealthy behavior. So things like lying and cheating, not respecting physical and emotional boundaries, those are all those huge red flags that the breaks and that foundation are happening, if that makes sense. I got a lot of questions about the difference between the different forms of abuse and what those look like and what those signs are. First, I want to say that loveisrespect.org is a resource that I use constantly, and they have a lot of great information about the definitions of abuse. And, in the biz, where I work, Turning Point, and other domestic and dating violence agencies, we typically use the term intimate partner violence because that covers a range of all the different types of relationships people have. But we also talk about the three main forms of abuse: physical, mental, emotional, verbal, we kind of put in the same category, and sexual abuse. And it's not to say those are the only three forms of abuse. Other forms of abuse fall into those. Those are kind of like an umbrella term. So things like financial abuse or social abuse can happen in that. But when we talk about specifically mental, emotional, verbal abuse, that's where we see things like manipulation, coercion, name calling, insults, criticizing, gaslighting. And if you want more information about those terms and what those looks like, please reach out to me. I absolutely can talk to you about those things. But I really would look at loveisrespect.org. They do a great job of defining those and what those look like and give really good examples. And I think I left a resource in your resource pages, maybe in session 2 or 4, that is Love is Respect. So I would check out that website. Just a heads up, these next questions are about sexual assault and consent, just letting you know. And this is a question that I actually had to sit on for a while and think about, because it's one that I get asked sometimes, but not this explicitly, and I appreciate the person who asked me this. And it is regretted sex rape? Is regretted sex rape? And it's interesting that they use the term regretted sex, because that's actually a term that we look into and we research, and it is a thing, regretted sex. But I want to break it down into this. We talked about what sexual assault is, right? We talked about consent and what that looks like. And if there is no consent, then it is sexual assault 100% of the time. Both people in that moment have to consent. And we learned about fries, right? that it's freely given. There's no force with either with physical or with words or whatever. There's no manipulation. Of their own free will, people are saying, yes, I want to engage in this. It is reversible. So at any time, someone could say, yeah, I'm done, let's stop, and it's over. And it's not that time to convince the person to keep going or try again later or just keep badgering the person until they give in, right? Reversible means I have revoked my right to consent. I'm not doing this anymore. That's what that means. Informed, meaning that that person is coherent and conscious and not blacked out or under the influence. It's enthusiastic. It's heck yes, heck yeah, I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your hand all night. Let's go. It's not a or I guess. And it's also a verbal yes. Everyone's body language is different. And it is specific, meaning everyone knows what's about to happen, how it's about to happen. There's a conversation beforehand about boundaries and what we're comfortable with. And when talking about boundaries, it's not a place to negotiate. Well, if you're not okay with this, then I want to do this. Or if you're not sure about that, let me talk you into it. Nope, it's a conversation about what's going to happen and making people feel appreciated and heard. And it's also about checking in. If you're making out with someone and they just like start bawling their eyes out, are you going to keep going? No, right? You're going to be like, oh God, you're crying. Like, what's wrong, right? So it's also checking in constantly, being like, are you good with this? Are you still okay? Is this fine? Like, it's the checking in. So when we talk about regretted sex, it means that you can consent to a sexual activity and then later on have feelings about it, whether that's confusion or maybe even sadness or anger, or maybe you just now looking back, you're like, I'm not sure if I wanted to do that. Those are normal feelings. Is regretted sex rape? Maybe. But what's really important is for all of us to have an understanding of consent, and all of us have, I know it sounds like lame, but having a trusted adult to go to. And I always say this, because if you're having feelings about an experience that you went through that you're not sure about, it's so, so important that you have somewhere where you can feel safe and talk about what happened, to get that other point of view, to really work through those feelings. And what's important is that you talk to someone who has the resources you need and is there to listen for understanding and not just to respond. And that's why I say a trusted adult, whether it's someone in your family or at home, an older cousin or a cool aunt, maybe mom and dad, whoever, maybe it's someone at school, like a teacher or a counselor or a nurse or a coach. Maybe it's someone in the community that you know, like a family friend, a pastor, a community member who works for an agency. I can absolutely be your trusted adult. But regretted sex can happen, and that's why it's really important that we all understand what consent is. We understand that we are in control of our own bodies and the choices that we make. And that when it comes to being sexual in your relationships, that's you make that decision knowing all the information that we can give you about your body and choices that you make and how that can affect you. How do you ask for consent? Great question. Did I add that resource to your resource page? I have like a cute little like worksheet that has like 100 different ways to ask for consent, but it's really as simple as like, hey, are you down for this? Hey, can I kiss you? Oh, do you want to hold hands when we walk to the car? It doesn't have to be like this really awkward, like robot, like, may I touch your thigh? Like, that's weird. But asking for consent is really just asking your partner if they feel safe and comfortable with you, and having those kind of tough conversations about being vulnerable and being open. And you might not be at the same place where your partner is, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you convince them to be at the same place, but it's understanding what makes them feel safe and what makes them feel heard and listened to. So how do you ask for consent? If you can't ask for consent, like with your words, looking into the eyes of your partner, then you're not ready to engage in whatever activity you're doing. If you can't have the mature conversation about boundaries and physical boundaries, then you are not mature enough to engage in that activity, period. What is the age of consent in Indiana? So the legal age of consent in the state of Indiana is 16. Good question. And then I got a question about about what age is it appropriate to have sex, and does it depend on your partner? Here's the thing. I am not a lawyer, nor have I ever claimed to be one. The age of consent is used for a reason, and there's a reason why it's 16, and people spend a lot of time figuring out that. And like I said, when we talked about regretted sex and rape and consent, all those things factor into your ability to make a choice and to feel empowered to make that choice. So just because the age of consent in the state of Indiana is 16, it doesn't mean that at the age of 16 you have to start having sex, or that you're mature enough to start having sex. That's not what that means at all. A lot of it has to do with keeping you safe from people who were older and preying on you. But just because you engage in sexual activity does not mean that'll make your relationship healthy or stronger or better. Next question. I got a question about kind of explaining that T video. Remember the consent is like T video. Basically, that was my email. Basically, the T video was about using T as a metaphor for sex. So that's what that was about, if that confused you. And this next question kind of falls into all the things that we have been talking about, and is, how is rape related to relationships? So rape can happen in relationships. When people are married, when they're dating, when they're just like friends, whatever. Rape can happen in a relationship. That's why it's so important. And it does happen in relationships. That's why it's so important for us to understand what consent is. I got a comment on one of the surveys that kind of struck me, and I just wanted to talk about it. And the person commented that, they think you might be able to avoid sexual assault if you don't go to a dark city at night, surround yourself with drunk people, and wear a short dress and fishnets. And it can be out of your control the majority of the time, but you can, stop it sometimes. Let me make this really clear. The only person who is responsible for a sexual assault is the attacker 100% of the time. 100% of the time. There's a lot of things in that comment that I could nitpick and point out, and what I don't want to do is make the person who made that comment feel bad for making that comment, because this is a very, very common myth and stereotype about sexual assault. The reality is that the only person who is responsible for a sexual assault is the perpetrator 100% of the time. It is never, ever, 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 ever the fault of the person who was assaulted for whatever reason. Someone could walk into your classroom butt naked, drunk, holding a box of condoms. Are they consenting to sex? No, they are a crazy person who got into your school naked, drunk, holding a box of condoms, right? One of the things that we do during the month of April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, is called What Were You Wearing? And if you've ever been to Dance Marathon, you've seen this fashion show. But long story short, a college did kind of an anonymous survey of the students asking if they had been assaulted and what outfits they were wearing. Out of 60, well, it's more like 30. Out of 30 something outfits, 90% of those are sweatpants and jeans, or their work uniform, or their pajamas. There's a prom dress, there's an army uniform, there's the things that you are probably wearing right now. What someone was wearing is not consent. It doesn't mean that they are wanting to have sex or be promiscuous. The only person who is responsible for a sexual assault is the attacker 100% of the time. And this kind of last question about sexual assault and consent was about the "What Were You Wearing" video. And it's saying, was that really sexual assault because she never said no? And remember, again, fries is that it is an enthusiastic yes that is freely given from an informed person who is awake and coherent and wants to consent. The absence of a no is not consent. Consent is a yes. I hope that makes sense. If consent still doesn't make any sense, please reach out to me. I can give you not only a lot of resources, but we can just talk about it, because I want to make sure that we all understand what consent is and how it works. Okay, so these last couple questions don't have anything to do with sexual assault and consent, so we're bringing it back. This next question is like the $1,000,000 question. How do you get over someone and stop wanting that person? I feel like 14-year-old me would have like a different answer than like me now. And the answer is just time. And I know that's kind of like a sucky answer, but it's the reality. It just takes time. Heartbreak is awful and it sucks and it's bad. But if you know that you're making the best choice for you, then that's a healthy choice. Because the number one healthy relationship you should always have for the rest of your life is with yourself. And if you know that that relationship that you were in wasn't right for you for whatever reason, maybe it wasn't even unhealthy or abusive, you can break up from a healthy relationship. That's normal and that happens a lot. Getting over someone and stop wanting that person, it just takes time. I think about the people that like I had like big crushes on or even like dated when I was younger and I thought I would never like get over it. I'm over it. Like it really just takes time. Leaning on your support system, taking time to yourself. If you're not comfortable being single, you should not be dating. Taking the time to heal and to process and really recognize what your expectations are in a relationship and never giving in just because someone doesn't match those expectations. If you know that you want someone who is trustworthy and loyal and understands you and listens to you, then don't ever take those back when someone wants to date you. Those are really good standards to meet. This was a question about intervening. Remember that day 5 is all about how to intervene safely. And someone asked, does intervening look different using the 3Ds, right? Remember the 3Ds? Does intervening, is it different when you know the person versus not knowing the person? Like if it's a friend, if it's a family member, if it's someone out in like a parking lot? And the answer is yes. I think one of the things that I'm not really sure if it gets really covered in that session is that it's all about what you're comfortable with doing. If you know somebody close and you know how to get their attention better, or you know what they listen to more, or you feel more comfortable around them, you might be more comfortable being direct with them, right? If you see like a random couple like fighting in the Kroger parking lot, being direct probably isn't going to be your first approach because you don't know them. So doing something like distracting or delegating is probably the safest choice for you, right? So intervening or starting those conversations or helping our friends is always going to look different depending on the situation and who it is. But what's the most important is that you're doing something, is that you're saying something. The reality is, are you going to save the day and stop whatever unhealthy or abusive behaviors are going to happen and that person is going to change their life? Probably not. And that's okay. Again, that also takes time, and you are planting a seed in whoever's brain that is, that they are cared for, that you see them, and that you're not going to tolerate that behavior, right? But it's all about saying something, doing something when you see something. Because if we all agree that abusive relationships are bad and should not happen, that means that we are not only modeling what it means to be in a healthy relationship to people, but that we're holding each other accountable. When we know that someone needs help, we give help. When we know that we need to confront our friends when they're being unhealthy or abusive partners in their relationships, that we're starting those conversations. And then last question, and it is, how can I trust my gut? How can I listen to my intuition and know when my brain is actually being nice to me? Trusting your gut. Everyone has that little voice in the back of their head that tells them or gives them warning signs and things. The reality is, if something feels off, it probably is. If you're in your head being like, I don't know if that's safe, or this person's kind of sketchy, or I'm getting kind of a weird vibe. Even if that voice is really, really small, trust that. If something feels off, it probably is. And a lot of times we miss red flags because we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, maybe they seem sketchy because of this, or oh, this place isn't that bad. I think I'm just having a bad day. Whatever it is. If it feels off, it probably is. So please, please, please make sure you're taking care of yourself. You have that support system of your friends, your peers, and of your trusted adults, and that you are continuing this education even when I'm not here, right? So staying up to date on things like domestic and dating violence and sexual assault is really important. Taking the time to go through the resources I gave is going to help you. Those are tools that I know are going to help you. So those are just some concrete ways to really trust your gut. It's always learning, always asking questions, and having these conversations with your friends. Like, when was the last time you and your friends talked about like dating or healthy relationships? Probably never, and that's okay, but you can start those conversations now. Those were all the questions I had. Again, if you still have any questions, if I go over anything and you still want more info, reach out to me. I am here for you. Your teachers do have my contact info, and I am willing to talk to you about anything. I'm bummed I couldn't be with y'all in class. I don't know. I'm pretty fun. I usually bring candy. But e-learning is weird, and we live in a weird time. So this is how I can reach out to you and answer your questions. So thank you all for doing the essentials and asking questions and doing the activities. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that I get to see you all sometime in real life. So thanks, and I'll catch y'all later. Okay, bye.